Hello, Americans. I'm Paul Harvey. You know what the news is. In a minute, you're going to hear the rest of the story. Now, the rest of the story. Remember the tale of the sorcerer's apprentice? A magician's young helper tries secretly to perform his master's magic, but the young fellow's not quite competent yet, and his sorcery gets out of hand. Well, once upon a time, there was a real-life sorcerer, a wizard of structural design, a genius architect named Louis Henri Sullivan. He was physically slight, although an impressive man, always immaculately dressed and groomed with large brown eyes. The eyes seemed to see through everything. Today he is recognized as the father of the Skyscraper. To those who served under him, he was the Liebermeister, the beloved master. And the apprentice in this true story was one of those admiring assistants, a young draftsman who worked in Sullivan's office. Sullivan particularly liked this fellow because he, the draftsman, was conscientious in his work, because he was stimulating in conversation, and because he shared with Sullivan a strong enthusiasm for the poetry of Walt Whitman. The assistant was originally hired because Sullivan needed help with the drawings on a new project, Chicago's huge auditorium theater and hotel. The boy was not quite 20, and yet his efforts pleased the Liebermeister, and over the years that followed, employer and employee became as close as such titles would permit. They would spend long evenings together in friendly argument over art and aesthetics, and in vociferous mutual admiration of the poet Whitman. It was an ideal, almost a father-son relationship, but this is the rest of the story. At 22, the young draftsman married, built a home for himself and his bride. His family grew, yet his salary did not grow accordingly. He did the unthinkable. He took extra work without telling his employer, Sullivan. In fact, the young man had surreptitiously designed several houses before his Liebermeister found out. Sullivan was riding through town one day on his way to his office when he passed a lot where a foundation was being laid and the design was unmistakable. Sullivan's trusted assistant had been moonlighting, bootlegging architectural jobs away from the company. The senior architect was furious. He stormed into the office that morning, announced to the young draftsman what he had seen, and without waiting for as much as an excuse, fired him right then and there. And after that unpleasant parting, neither said one word to the other for a dozen years. And yet, painful as the experience had been for the young man, it was in a way the nicest thing anybody could have done for him, for instead of remaining in the impressive shadow of the great Louis Henri Sullivan, the assistant was forced on his own and proceeded to prove himself, as have few in the history of his art. But the real-life apprentice that you've just met went on to eclipse even the accomplishments of his mentor. It is tempting to assume that greatness is irrepressible, and yet now you will always remember the phenomenal architectural career that began not because it had to, but rather because a young draftsman crossed his boss to feed his family. A brilliant young architect's assistant named Frank Lloyd Wright. Now you know the rest of the story.